Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and I slowed down on the whole thing because you said we weren't going to make the deadline. So I was like, okay, I've got a few days.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have gotten it to you like, in an hour or something.
I'm with you.
And that's their
Okay.
life.
Just making sure. Things can get lost in the translation.
All right, good evening. I'm going to call to order the Assembly Finance Committee meeting for November 1st, 2018. The time is 5:32, and we are in the Mona Lisa Drexler Assembly Chambers. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
I am here.
Ms. Sanford?
Present.
Ms. Lake?
Here.
We expect Ms. Major shortly. Ms. Williams?
Here.
Mr. Tacky?
Here.
Mr. Lejeski?
Here.
Mr. Cooper?
Here.
And Mr. Quist?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. So for those who might not be familiar where our exits are, or if any of our new members have a sudden change of heart, there's entrance we came in through here in the center, and then on either side, clearly marked exit, follow the signs, and you'll be outside. That brings us to item number 2 on our agenda, memoranda, reports, and presentations. 2A, energy project update by Borough Administration with a question and answer period. Mr. Mayor, do you have a report for us?
We do. Thank you, Mr. Quist. We have Mr. Ben Leffler with Public Works here for a presentation today. The floor is yours.
All right. Hello. For the new folks, my name is Ben Leffler. I'm the Energy Management Engineer in the Public Works Department. And this is my annual energy update to the Assembly for fiscal year 2018. I'm going to go over a few things. I'm going to go over our partnership with ASEP on our energy program, talk about cost and usage trends in the borough.
And Mr. Leffler, if I could interrupt you to ask about interruptions, would you like questions throughout the presentation, or should we save them for the end?
Yes, my content's a little less than 15 minutes, and I'm happy to field questions throughout.
Thank you.
Yep. Follow up on some projects we did in the last fiscal year, talk about some current projects underway, and then go over just an overview of what energy projects are, what their paybacks are, with an aside on solar, because I get a lot of questions about solar. So the ASEP partnership, for anyone who's not aware, the borough has a memorandum of agreement with ASEP related to my position to provide for coordination of programs and projects involving development, implementation, evaluation of energy efficiency, delivery, and alternative and renewable energy systems. And this has been in place for 2.5 years, and it's been beneficial to both parties. The borough, we get access to ASEP's energy expertise. We've got an internship program, which I'll talk about, and we've talked with Mayor Ward about, going forward with this partnership, about looking at community-wide impacts that ASEP may be able to help with. So one thing I wanted to address is the biomass combined heat and power pilot project that I was before the Assembly several times for. So as you've probably heard, it has been discontinued. We ran into several concurrent hurdles on the procurement side, some with the equipment and international procurement, some with the alignment of our scope and our budget and what we were able to change and what we weren't. But the good things are no grant funds were expended, so the grant funds will go back to the granting agencies, and hopefully they'll find other good places to spend them. On our side, no significant expenditures. There was staff time and some advertising for procurement. But we'll be able to redirect the funds we had appropriated for this project to other energy projects. And both internally and externally, we've been sharing lessons learned. And I actually talked to some rural cooperatives yesterday about lessons learned on partnering and pilot projects. So.
Excuse me. Mr. Gray? And then Mr. Lejeski.
Yes, sure, Mr. Leffler. I was just curious about the grant funds that you got. Are you going to have to give those funds back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just curious. Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Lejeski?
I was just pointing to Mr. Gray.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, the intern program. We've had 3 interns since about this time last year. Riley was our first intern. grew up in Fairbanks, was going to UAF, and he's since moved on to pursue a PhD in physics at Iowa. And then Tessa grew up in Fairbanks, and she was home for the summer from Carnegie Mellon and did some work for us. And then currently Sherjeel Chima from Anchorage, who's pursuing a EE major at UAF, is our current intern. And all of them have kind of worked sequentially on an effort to basically use computer programming to do analysis on our building control data. So we have about a dozen buildings where their ventilation systems are controlled by computers. And there's a wealth of data in those systems that's currently just being used for operational day-to-day, making sure the system's functional. And so it's been a good opportunity for them to work on coding and data analysis to try and basically mine some value out of that data on the energy side and look for energy saving opportunities on changing how we control our buildings. And I'll give one example that's come up through this. So cost and usage trends for the last fiscal year. This plot has electricity and heating sources all plotted on the same scale and the same units. So kilowatt hours have been converted to MMBTU is a million BTUs of energy. So kilowatt hours have been converted, cubic feet of natural gas, gallons of oil, it's all been converted to BTUs. And this is for the last 5.5 years. And so we can kind of see how things have been trending. Nothing's, we've seen that big drop in heating fuel prices in 2015, 2016, and now it's been trending back upward. And electricity has kind of followed a similar trajectory. But a takeaway here is, this is why we don't heat with electricity, because for the same amount of energy, it costs 3 or even 4 times as much. And the GS1 is a residential rate, and the GS2 is a commercial rate. So we have big buildings have commercial rate, smaller buildings have residential rate. Focusing in just on the heat energy, one thing that has come up is, some of our buildings can run on natural gas or fuel oil, and we're pretty much at a parity point right now. So all of our buildings that can run on natural gas are running on natural gas. It's lower maintenance, better for air quality, and currently there's no cost detriment to doing so. And just for fun, I've inflation adjusted all of these prices, so they look a little flatter, especially electricity, when you account for the value of money changing. So,
Mr. Lejeski.
I'm just curious, where did you get your inflation data from?
I think from the federal government, whatever the
Federal Reserve of St. Louis?
I can get you specifically, but whatever the standard inflation index number is.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Cooper.
I just noticed on the chart you only have fuel oil number 1, and I assume that's because when we're running borough buildings on diesel, we're using number 1 only.
That's correct. And these are our spread off of rack prices. So these aren't actually derived from bills. These are based on what our contract versus rack price is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Berman-Williams.
You said that all the buildings that can run on natural gas are doing so. What's the limiting factor? Access to gas, or there aren't any more that can be converted?
That's a good question. I don't actually know how exactly what facilities have pipeline access and don't have boilers. There may be some. So that's a good question. Yeah.
All right. Please continue.
Yep. Just making myself a note. All right, so zooming out at our total usage and costs for fiscal year 18 and breaking down for school district and non-school district facilities, so this excludes fire stations. We don't have them included in our database. So total energy usage, the borough is about 30% of the total heat and electricity usage, and again, 30% on the cost. So 6.8 million for the school district, 2.9 for non-school district facilities. And from here on, I'm going to focus just on non-school district facilities. So Mark Nilsson at the school district is responsible for their energy projects and operations. He and I work together, but I'll focus on non-school district from here on out. This is our breakdown of energy usage by source and energy cost by source on the right. This is just energy usage fiscal year 17 on the left and fiscal year 18 on the right. So you can see a significant increase in our natural gas usage. About halfway through fiscal year 17, we converted the buildings that have natural gas capability to natural gas. And then looking at a cost basis from last year to this year. So this is an important takeaway as well. So electricity is 38% of our energy usage, but it's 60% of our energy cost. And so you'll see that the majority of our energy reduction projects are focused on electricity because there's ripe opportunities and because it's a high cost driver for us. And then just trending things over time. So every point on this graph is an average of the previous 12 months of usage. And so it shows our sort of gradual decline in electricity, stable district heat, and then sort of the shift between natural gas and fuel oil. And then if we look at that on a dollar basis, I've added in water and sewer. You can't really convert water to BTUs, but this is our overall utility costs since 2011. And these are driven by a combination of usage and fuel price. Oh, and one note on this usage, I think this tapering, so you can see we're using the least fuel oil we have in this period. I suspect that due to our switch to natural gas, there are a bunch of half-full fuel tanks out there, and we're not going to account for that fuel usage until they get filled. So this may change next year when these tanks get topped off. Yep.
Mr. Lejeski?
For FNSB energy usage, is that inclusive of what the school district uses?
No, again, these are non-school district facilities.
Okay, you already said that earlier.
Yep.
It sounds like I missed that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no worries. Okay, zooming in just on electricity usage. So our peak within our data set of maximum kilowatt hours used per year was in 2013, and since then we've averaged about a 2% per year decline in electricity usage. And so that was true last year, and that's held for the past year. And this really is a combination of design and construction, making energy efficient decisions in renovations, facilities maintenance, making energy efficient decisions when they're doing maintenance, and then targeted energy efficiency projects. And then again, looking at heat usage specifically, we have to track that with what the weather is like. And so here our heating degree day heat requirement, again a 12-month average is in black, and our total heat usage is in red. And I think part of that spread is due to efficiency improvements, and some is due to fuel tanks not having been filled yet. But we want to see these curves depart from each other and use less heat per heating degree day. And then here's a graph of the 10 most utility expensive facilities that we have outside of the school district, and how their costs in 2017 compare to 2018. All have gone up slightly as fuel prices have gone up. Well, all but one has gone up, and I would point out that this facility is actually had less utility costs in fiscal year 18 than 17, and I'll point out why that's happened. So following up on some projects from last year, so about this time last year at the Big Dipper, we converted the hockey rink lighting to LED and also the fluorescence. So that was done as a project, about $150,000. Cut the wattage in about half and estimated to save a little under $15,000 a year. And then as part of a maintenance relamp, I paid for the premium cost of having LED lamps instead of fluorescent lamps. Almost a 60% wattage reduction, again about $14,000 in estimated savings. So those projects combined we thought would save a little under $30,000. And taking actual data, billing data for the Big Dipper, and averaging the years prior to the project happening, and then averaging the years since, we've seen a 10% reduction in usage, and it's added up to $28,000 in savings, so pretty close to what we estimated. So it's good to see those impacts materializing in the bills. For this building, so this ties together, so the intern who was digging into the data saw that this ventilation system was running nights and weekends unnecessarily. Just implementing a schedule was projected to save about $32,000 in electricity and $6,000 in heat. Again, the same thing, averaging before and after the change, and we've seen a $31,000 reduction in the energy costs for this building per year. Current energy projects, so these are all POs that have been approved. The top two are those Big Dipper projects from last year, and then everything else is projects that we've gotten out the door since the biomass project was discontinued. basically there's project costs in the first column, expected annual savings in the second, a simple payback calculation, and then for each line there's a different expected lifetime of the equipment going in, but totaling the savings over the lifetime of the project. We get the last column. And so if you look at the bottom, for $345,000 in projects, we're expecting to save $73,000 a year, so an aggregate of 4.7-year payback. And then if you add up all the lifetime savings, total savings of over $650,000. So good impacts from these small projects. Some examples are parking lot lights at this building, the Dipper, and the library are going to be changed. Transfer sites, some that don't have improvement projects are being changed. Some occupancy sensors on lighting circuits that are on when they don't necessarily need to be on, stuff like that. And then a talk about payback and how we make choices. And so specifically on solar, I get a lot of questions, so I thought this would be a quick thing to share. So this is a graph of how many kilowatt hours you'll get from a kilowatt of solar panels in an assortment of cities. And as expected, Fairbanks has a relatively low solar resource. So a kilowatt of panels here doesn't give you as much energy as it would in these other locations, but that's only part of the equation. The other part is how much that electricity is worth. And in this selection of cities, we're second only to Honolulu in terms of how much we pay for electricity. So when you multiply those two together, you get sort of how many dollars per year a kilowatt of solar panels will provide for you. And we're ahead of many cities where solar is very popular. Now the other side of the equation is how much it costs to install solar here versus Phoenix. It's certainly cheaper there, but this means to me that it should be on the table and that we should consider it. And so we've been working with some interested groups in the community, for the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, talking with ASAP and CCHRC about their experiences. And there's some pathways forward that I think the borough should have discussions about. One is a large-scale, third-party, legally and financially complex project where you basically have a outside entity install solar on a whole bunch of facilities, and you pay them for the electricity that comes off of those panels. And they're able to realize a profit because they're able to take a tax subsidy and depreciation. Complex, but potentially big impact. We could do a normal IFB procurement, but our scale is limited by our budget, and I'll talk about payback on my last slide for this presentation. One I think has a lot of merit is community solar, where perhaps a utility or another entity builds a bunch of solar panels in one location, and then community members can lease or purchase a share of that. So they get to, and have it counted against their bill. So they get to have solar power that they use, and they don't have to deal with their roof. Maybe their house isn't in a good place for solar. So it creates a lot of good access. And then what we've seen in Anchorage is a solarized program where a neighborhood decides that a whole bunch of regionally close locations decide they're all going to go buy solar at the same time, and they get some price benefit from that economy of scale of one contractor getting a whole lot of work. So just topics for discussion that I wanted to put out there. And then this is my last slide, is kind of how different types of energy efficiency projects stack up. And two things that are in play is, one is the payback. Clearly a shorter payback is better, but the other is sort of what the barrier to entry is. So controls changes can be done for free. Daylight sensors, LED lamps, LED fixtures, they can be done for, small projects can be single thousands of dollars. Same for motors and drives. But when you get into big boiler upgrades, combined heat and power, solar, you're looking at much bigger projects as a base starting point. And so where solar kind of falls in this mix is we're looking at projects that are 10 to 20-year payback. So it's better to go do all of the short payback projects first, and then worry about these longer-term paybacks. And
Mr. Lucheski.
Yeah, do you have a certain payback span that you don't want to go past? Like
Sure.
have a cutoff point and say this is not, we'd rather just do something else with it?
Sure. So generally there's sort of a smattering of projects that are kind of in the mix and being considered and explored. And I'd say industry standards, anything under 5 years is, you should probably just move on it as soon as you're ready. But if it's 6 years and it's easy, or it's 7 years and it's easy, there's also like a trade-off in sort of time and investment versus payback. And so So
Well, I'm
yeah,
also kinda
there's no
wondering-
hard cutoff.
Let's suppose you had a really good solar panel project. It doesn't matter what it is, and it's 5 years, and it's a really big one.
Yep.
Then you had a smaller one that's not as good, but it's 7 years. Is it possible that you have, since you're already doing the big one, then suddenly like the other one starts looking a lot better to do them as a package?
Certainly that could play out. And other ways this plays out is if maintenance is already in doing something and we can add an energy efficiency measure to work they're already doing. And I should say that, in major maintenance, so design and construction, when they were doing the roof, redoing the roof on this building this summer, I was involved in doing the payback calculations. Do we add more insulation? Do we raise the parapets and add more insulation? Is that payback for itself? So we make those kind of considerations as well. But we don't have a hard year cutoff. It's kind of just of what we can do, what are the most appetizing ones, and we move forward on those.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I think that's
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Leffler, can you quickly go back through the memorandum of agreements with, just kind of briefly describe that in the intern agreement? My understanding is the MOU has expired, and we're not in that agreement anymore. Are we still in there? Do we still have that agreement with ASAP?
I think we are probably outside. I think so we started with an MOU for my position, and then we moved to an MOA with the intern position. And I think you are right that UAF has not returned the MOA at this point. Yep.
Yeah, well, we could always enter into it again if we wanted to.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
Any questions? I have a couple, if I may. So you had a chart earlier with a average 2% decrease in electrical usage over the last few or several years. And do you see that you being able to maintain that trend? And is there a lot of low-hanging fruit still? I imagine at some point you can't. It's only 2%, but that adds up, and at some point there isn't a lot of electrical savings to find, or is there a lot out there still?
Sure. I think we can improve on 2%, and the big reason is that technology is changing. 2 years ago, I gave this presentation and said that switching fluorescence for LED did not make sense. And today it does, and the technology has advanced, the prices have come down, and we're currently scoping to switch this building and Nolene Library completely to LED in exchange for the fluorescence. And that's a 30 to 40% reduction in wattage for that lighting. So I think there will always be things coming up. Condensing natural gas boilers are topping 95% efficiency compared to our current 85% efficient boilers. So I think technology will keep moving. And there will continue to be opportunities.
Thank you. I have one more regarding the HVAC schedule for this building.
Yep.
Nights and weekends. Do you happen to know what nights and weekends are according to the schedule that it's off?
Sure. So originally we had it off on weekends. The occupancy was low enough that full ventilation wasn't needed. And to be clear, so there are two ventilation systems for this building. So there's one for this chambers that's on an occupancy sensor. So anytime this room is occupied, that ventilation is operating. And then, we did add some Saturday hours on the main ventilation system because it was requested. So what our current intern is looking at is can we account for reduced occupancy and still provide a reduced rate of ventilation, whereas currently it's been either on or off. And so we're looking at modulating to better follow building usage.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Lejeski and then Mr. Cooper.
Hopefully I don't get moderated. I don't think this is debate, but when it comes to the air circulating this building, good job. That's really amazing. Especially if you calculate that as like a perpetuity or something, that's a lot more than $30,000. That's like, depending on what number you use, that's 300,000 or 3 million or whatever. It's a lot of money. Anyways, I'm just wondering though if there's possible savings like that with school district buildings or other buildings within the borough, if anyone's kind of sat down and put some time and effort into thinking about that.
I don't want to speak for the school district, but my impression is that Mark is looking at those things and that they're very keen on reducing their energy usage. So you could certainly ask him.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that Ms. Major has joined us, Mr. Cooper, and then Mr. Gray.
So I guess two questions. One, if I ask the administration to perhaps email out a copy of the presentation to everybody, just so that we have that. I don't think we need a paper version, but email would be great. And then two, and this is another request of the administration, perhaps we can work with the school district to get a presentation on their energy efficiency at some point and the steps that they're taking. I recall that we had that a few years ago, like, well, 4 years ago or something. I don't know, time blends together for me, but it would be good to maybe have them come in and address some of these same issues that Mr. Leffler has talked to us about.
Mr. Gray?
The Solarize Anchorage project that you mentioned, that doesn't strike me as something that was necessarily legislatively driven. Is that
Correct.
something that kind of ASAP and the community put together down there?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a reason why we couldn't do that here, or is it just scale?
No, I don't think there's any, what you need is a dense area of interest.
Sure.
And not being a solar installer, I don't know what the thresholds for that are, but yeah,
Well, maybe we can drum up some interest.
sure.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for the report. Oh, no, you're out of order at this time, sir, but we can talk later, though. Thank you. So that brings us to item 3, contracts and bid awards, of which we have none. It rapidly takes us to item 4, advanced ordinance and resolutions, also of which we have none. And then on to items 5. Do we have any discussion on monthly budget reports or general fund balance report? Hey, Mr. Cooper.
Let's make my plug for the new assembly members. You'll get emailed copies of the general fund updated fund balance reports on a regularly routine basis, and they're a good tool to see where we're at with current fiscal year appropriations and where our general fund balance is at. So when we have a current one, or more current one, I'll probably talk about it more, but just look for that in your emails.
Right, thank you. Mr. Lejeski.
What's the most current report on the general fund? I'm showing in my email, it looks like September 27th. That's about right. I don't know if there's a more recent one.
Mr. Williams,
27's what
do you happen to know the date of the most recent report?
That sounds familiar, and we can get an updated report to you guys. No
Thank
problem.
you. All right. Any other comments on the monthly budget report? Okay, that brings us to item 6, Mayor Assembly comments. Mayor Ward, and I'll remind everybody that these comments are limited to finance-related items. There will be opportunity for comments in a more general sense during the Committee of the Whole. Mayor Ward.
No comment, thank you.
Hey. Ms. Major?
No comment.
Ms. Berman-Williams?
No comment.
Okay, Mr. Tacky?
No comment.
Mr. Lejeski?
I'm glad we got 3 new faces and 3 new brains here to help us solve the borough's fiscal challenges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray.
No comment at this time.
Ms. Sanford?
None, thank you.
All right, Mr. Cooper, anything else?
No comments.
All right, Ms. Like?
I'm glad we have 6 old brains here to help the new brains.
Very nice. All right, and I don't have any comments at this time as well, which brings us to 5:59, and we are adjourned.